The Committee of the Whole is back in order. Good morning, colleagues. We are on page 117 in miscellaneous provisions. Section 1, the retirement option. Any senator wish to be heard on this miscellaneous provision? Section 2, the temporary employment of retired corrections officers. This is boilerplate, but anyone wish to comment? Any objections? Section 3, temporary employment of retired Guam police officers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I guess the one question I have initially before I follow on with the moving forward into 2019 is, has this provision been used by any of these entities, law enforcement entities, in this fiscal year? Are you aware, or are any of the oversight chairs aware of whether this provision is being actively utilized?
I apologize. I did not ask that question during the budget hearing. I know
Okay.
that this is something that we've allowed them to do because of the shortage. I'm not sure if
Actually, and that's why I was going to follow on, Mr. Speaker, with a follow-on comment, because in the foreseeable next 6 months, there will literally be a good number of our personnel, and as a matter of fact, a team just left earlier this week, that will be either participating in extended exercises, military exercises off island. Sometimes they're called exercises versus deployments, and then others are participating in deployments. So this is certainly a tool that I hope that these law enforcement agencies are able to actively utilize in conjunction with recruiting some of the necessary law enforcement personnel. So I just wanted to highlight that moving into fiscal year 19. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And that was the reason why this has been a boilerplate for the last, since I've been a member of the legislature. Any objection to Section 3? Section 4, the temporary employment of retired government firefighters. Section 5, retired customs and quarantine agents. Six, temporary employment of retired Department of Revenue and Taxation employees.
Mr. Speaker, I just have a simple question. Is it possible that so far from Section 2, 3, 4, and 5, because they're all peace officers, that it could have been wrapped up as one and allowed temporary across the board for all the peace officers to have that flexibility in the event there is a shortage? May it be at the Department of Agriculture, the game wardens, or whatever other agencies that has that. Could that have been possible if amendment was to merge them all as one, and that they meet still the same criteria, you know, that no higher than the qualifications that require the fire department, such as the police and so forth? Could that have been possible?
Because of the different position titles, it was recommended to keep them separate.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Let me get through 6. I understand you have one. 6, revenue and taxation agents. Senator Lee, I understand you have an amendment.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning, colleagues. I had an amendment circulated yesterday for this section to add a new section to include temporary employment of retired Government of Guam social workers. We've heard many times over from Child Protective Services and those at BOSA that they are in need of folks. We've tried very hard to ensure that they get the proper funding to be able to hire them, but then we also just want to give them authorization to be able to bring some of their people back who have experience in this in this realm, and so this just would allow them to hire retirees pursuant to this section.
So, thank you. Senator Lee has an amendment on the floor. Senator Nicholas, I understand you wish to speak on it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you reference sections 6, section 5, section 4, and section 3, it only allows for step 1. You can only have the minimum hired at step 1. And I guess my question to the author is, why are we allowing for step 2 only for the social workers?
These would be social workers who have certain certifications that they also need to keep up. So, I mean, there's CEUs that they would need to continue to pay for, and I think they've just had many, many challenges in finding people. It's a very kind of small subset of our population who are able to do this work, and so that's the reason they have requested for this specific language. So I'm just here to move it forward. But if the senator would like to further amend, that's his prerogative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, these sections here, they allow for the agencies to basically hire back retirees and have them double dip. And what these provisions say is, if you're going to hire back a retiree and allow them to double dip, they're coming in at step 1. They're coming in at the lowest step. And so I think it's necessary for us to just be consistent with that across the board. Our police officers, our firefighters, those are all critical positions as well that have specialized skill sets. And so if we're going to include this amendment that's going to open it up for social workers, we should be consistent that we're allowing them to come in, but at step 1. So that will be my amendment, Mr. Chairman, to amend it from step 2 down to step 1.
Thank you, Senator Nicholas. There's an amendment to the 5th line to have it step 1 rather than step 2. Senator Agan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I believe the mover of the amendment certainly has an excellent point in regards to any individual that's retired can only, I'm looking at one of the languages in section 5, only at step 1, but the way this language reads, says, retiree shall be hired at a minimum of step 2. So even the verbiage is not consistent with some of the law enforcement provisions. So I don't know if the mover of the amendment would like to maintain that consistency there, but I certainly support the idea of making it consistent across the board. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Nicholas.
Senator Reagan raises a good point. Yes, the amendment will be to, I'll withdraw the original amendment that just saying step 1 and just have the language consistent with the other sections.
Okay, with the motion to withdraw, no objection heard. The new amendment is to make it consistent with the previous 4 sections, and we'll have legal counsel make sure that it reads the same, so there's equity. All right? Any objection? Any other senator wish to be heard on the amendment? Any objection to the amendment as amended? And for the information of the original mover, Senator Lee, we will renumber this probably at the end of the section, because we don't want to put it as 7, because all the remaining followings are numbered, and we would have to check all the references back. All right? So it'll be given a number in sequence at the end of the chapter. Is that okay? Senator Ada, you have a...
Was this just a one-page amendment? Because I guess if you take a look at the last sentence, I guess it leaves out a whole... I guess it was supposed to read, and again, 30 days after the end of the fiscal year, as in the other sections.
It's a 2-page. We need to be on the microphone because otherwise nobody else hears.
I apologize, Senator. Yes, this, as it was circulated, I think it was attached to a separate amendment. So you're correct. The remaining language is, sorry,
Yeah, I found it.
30 days after the end of the fiscal year, and it continues as in all the other sections. Sudosmasi.
Thank you. So that the Lee amendment has been adopted. Did your hand go up, Senator Snogstein? Okay. 7, Gov Guam Health Insurance Program enrollment for employment.
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment that's forthcoming from legal in reference to temporary employment of retired attorneys for the Attorney General's office. Once it gets in, I just want to make sure that I'm able to add it.
Yeah, you'll be able to add it, and we can put it at the end of the chapter, because I'm not going to put this one in sequence here, because it's going to throw everything off afterwards. Everything after has been numbered, and then the reference back is going to throw everything off.
All right, thank you.
So I will entertain your amendment
Dan, thank you.
before we close the chapter. Okay? Gov Guam Health Insurance Program. Any comments? Section 8, locum tenens exemption during the absence of the chief medical examiner. Boilerplate, just to protect us, and we know that he is currently trying to transition out. Thank you. Advance payment for medical services. Any senator wish to be heard on that? 10, transfer of employees. Senator Dragan? Do you wish to be heard on this section?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we noticed that, or at least from my vantage point, that this particular provision has been in the budget bill. It's also inclusive in this fiscal year's budget, and unfortunately has not been utilized, or at least from my perspective, Mr. Speaker. So if you or any of our colleagues are aware of the use of this provision within the government of Guam, it certainly would be very helpful to understand how it's been applied and where. And just for the information of the public, the section is Section 10, and the title is Transfer of Employees. And it allows Imagalahin Guahan, the governor of Guam, to be able to transfer employees, even for a short duration of time, to other entities within the government of Guam to provide additional support. And it's consistent with some of the provisions, more long-term provisions contained in Public Law 34-87, which is the reorganization provision of the entire government of Guam. So, Mr. Speaker, it would be interesting to find out if, in fact, this particular tool has been utilized, because even in 2 of your SES meetings, Special Economic Service meetings, the question was posed, and apparently the responses that I received I did not get the sense that there was priority being placed on actually using or reassigning existing government of Guam personnel to other agencies to provide and to augment the services and the functions that they provide. So, Mr. Speaker, it's an excellent provision. It's a tool that has been available to the governor of Guam for a number of budget cycles now. And I'm just hopeful that in this particular case, as we transition to the next FY, that this is a tool that is more actively utilized in addition to the provisions contained in Public Law 34-87. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. Do you wish to make any amendments to the subsection 7? All right, thank you. All right, on that, on the entire section on transfer of employees, anybody, any other senator wish to be heard? Any other senator wish to be heard on this section regarding the transfer of employees? Restriction on hiring unclassified employees. Senator Lee.
Senator Spasi, Mr. Speaker, this amendment was circulated yesterday. So this is to amend Chapter 12, Section 11 by adding the new subsection to read Child Protective Service social workers at the Department of Public Health and Social Services. So we're including them in this exemption, and that's this amendment. Senator Spasi.
And we'll leave it to legal to stick this in wherever they feel it's appropriate. If it passes, I'm looking out and seeing if any of the senators have any concerns. Any senator wish to be heard on this Lee amendment? Vice Speaker? Senator Uggan?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I certainly support the amendment, Mr. Speaker, but I was under the impression, because I was also looking at social workers as we were I was previewing the budget previously, but the language in subsection C, nurses, doctors, licensed health professionals, and ancillary health employees necessary for clinical purposes, then it highlights the agencies, public health, behavioral health, medical examiner, GMH. I was under the impression that that would be inclusive of social workers, but if it's not, then I certainly support the idea of highlighting it even further. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Lee?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We wanted to just be extremely clear and spell them out to ensure that they were included.
All right,
Thank you.
fine. So with this one, it could be just come in as Q. Okay? Any senator wish to be heard on this amendment? Any senator wish to be heard on this amendment? Senator Uggan.
Oh, not the amendment.
Oh.
The section.
Okay. Just on the amendment first. All right, fine. A new Q has been added. Senator Uggan, on the entire section on restriction
Thank
of
you very
hiring
much.
unclassified.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the section and the entire chapter, actually, because there are 4 or 5 provisions that provide allowances to bring in personnel who have retired. And then here is a restriction on hiring of unclassified employees provision. So, Mr. Speaker, if our colleagues would concede to considering a new sub-item or even a statement that says, unless otherwise authorized in this act, something to that effect, because this would be contradictory to the 4 or 5 other sections that allows for law enforcement to be able to recruit or to bring in retired law enforcement officers to be able to augment any requirement. So I just want to bring that up as a concern. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. And I'll have legal put that in if there's no objection to a qualifier. On the Uggan amendment, his amendment was there's all this restrictions of hiring unless otherwise provided in this chapter. Okay? The Uggan amendment has been adopted. Now on the whole section 11, unclassified. Any other senator wish to be heard on this section? Thank you. Section 12, Board and Commission stipends. Board and Commission stipends.
Mr. Speaker, I'm just trying to refresh my memory. Could you please explain this, except for commissioners who have served continuously for 10 years? Are they allowed to receive more, or they're not allowed to receive?
They get more. They get more. I apologize. Hold just a sec. We'll take a short recess and let me get a clarification. Thank you. Is everybody clear on this section? This was an exception that was made to cap the number of meetings because there was a time when the Civil Service Commission was so backlogged that they had more than and they were getting a stipend, and it was a large sum, and so they just had it max at $250 is the most that any board member can get in a month. Okay? And to address one of the other concerns, the very last sentence gives the Maggot Lahi, by executive order, the authority to waive the payment of meeting stipends if it's deemed necessary. Yes, Senator.
Just a point of inquiry, Mr. Chairman. Does that apply also to the Education Board and the PUC and the CCU?
Correct. Okay. On this section, any senator wish to add anything? Or can we just get it through? On the board commission and commission stipends. Senator Uggan, I see your light on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm looking at the overall budget, and in the subsequent section, the increments for fiscal year 19 will be suspended for all classified employees. And then here we're providing an allowance for board and commission stipends. So, Mr. Speaker, if I can be given an opportunity to be able to bookmark this section and come up with an amendment that would restrict board and commission stipends that are funded within this budget act, at least for fiscal year 19, then I would like to have that opportunity.
I will bookmark it and we'll come back and you can address it. I just want to caution that there is a problem trying to even get people to serve on boards. And I think those of you that are vying for ADLU will soon find out that there may be need to incentivize with at least gas money or something. But I'll bookmark
actually,
it.
only because, Mr. Speaker, if I may, only because you brought it up, then what if a number of these agencies were reorganized and consolidated, then obviously we won't need that many board members. So, I mean, there's a method to looking at this entire provision and ensuring that if we are going to take the increments from our classified employees of the government of Guam, and we're still looking at entertaining boards and commission stipends, I think that certainly this is one area that we can suspend an expense, at least for the fiscal year.
All right, I'll bookmark it and you can prepare whatever amendment you wish. Okay, so section 12 on boards and commissions is bookmarked. Contracts, section 13. Any senator wish to be heard on this section? Senator Lee.
Mr. Speaker, I'm just requesting a bookmark on this section. I have language that I'd like to insert with respect to the Department of Labor, limited term labor workers, and I'll be circulating that amendment very shortly. Thank you.
Okay. So 12 and 13 have now been bookmarked. '14, program reporting requirements for employment, placement, job training. Any senator wish to be heard on this section? 15, authorization for legal services for the Department of Public Works, the Guam Building Code Council, the Guam Licensure Board and Appeals Board. Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think just the idea of consolidating funding resources so that these entities, the Guam Building Code, Department of Public Works, the Contractors License Board, and the Appeals Board will have an opportunity to have legal representation certainly is a good approach. It's just that it provides an allowance, may enter into, and I'm trying to figure out what language would be appropriate in terms of ensuring that if in fact they're going to require legal services, that they collectively move in this particular direction. So I just wanted to share that concern because we can already envision that some of these other entities would acquire their own legal counsel representation individually. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any amendments or any other comments on this section? Section 16, the requirement for the CRER, Consolidated Revenue and Expenditure Report. Any senator? Any senator? Section 17, this is the additional appropriation to Guam Memorial Hospital Authority. The $5 million from the general fund amnesty.
Mr. Speaker.
Senator Espaldon.
Thank you. I did pass out an amendment to this section to basically amend the language in Section 6, basically for housekeeping purposes. And basically, it's just to add the words after the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority. It should be two words: stabilization fund, and then at the very end, after Medicare and Medicaid services, the words survey of 2018. So it will be more consistent with what we have already established.
Has everybody seen the amendment? It was just passed out this morning.
Yes.
Don't. Any senator wish to be heard on the Espaldon amendment to this section?
It's just housekeeping. It's more to just dot the I's and cross the T's.
I'll give it to Senator Uggan. It's not stapled together. Is everybody, are we all on the same amendment? It reads, appropriation for GMHA, the sum of $5 million is appropriated from the General Fund Amnesty Program. Proceeds received in fiscal year 2018 to the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority. And then he adds in the two new words, stabilization fund, for its operations in fiscal year 2018, inclusive of correcting the deficiencies as identified in the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services. Again, he adds the word survey of 2018.
And just for a point of information on that, the GMH Authority Stabilization Fund was created in Public Law 3487. So,
okay. Any senator wish to be heard on this or any objection to it? Okay. No objection. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
And then I also have a follow-up amendment. It doesn't necessarily have to go into this section, but it's relative to the same issue, and it could be placed anywhere in this section according to your committee. But basically, it's basically an amendment to Section 15 of Public Law 3487 relative to the GMH Stabilization Fund, and that's been passed out as well. And what we've done is, since we have repealed the general sales tax, we amended it, this portion within Public Law 3487, that those revenues received by or on behalf of the government of Guam resulting from the general fund tax amnesty proceeds received in fiscal year 2018 that are dedicated to GMH shall be deposited into the GMH Stabilization Fund and shall be accounted for and used periodically for the following purposes. A, to correct deficiencies identified in the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services Survey of 2018, and once these deficiencies are corrected, the GMHA may use any remaining balances to address items B and C. Basically, it puts the priority of any funds that we are appropriating from the general fund tax amnesty will go first and foremost towards the deficiencies that the Medicare and Medicaid Services Survey of 2018 identified. Again, it's more of a housekeeping thing, but in Public Law 3487, we did create the GMH Stabilization Fund for the purpose of helping GMH stabilize.
Okay. Everybody have the two-page amendment by Senator Espaldon. We'll number it 18 and renumber the current 18 to 19, so it properly follows, so we have the stabilization fund together. Senator St. Augustine. Oh. Senator Uggan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know that the focus is on retaining the certification for Medicare and Medicaid prior to October 3rd, whatever that deadline is. But there were some serious issues also identified by the JACO accreditation team that needs to be addressed. And it falls into the category of safe, quality healthcare treatment over GMH. So I don't know, it's just an idea or an issue that I'd like to bring to the attention of the mover of the amendment, whether he would like to incorporate some of the concerns that were addressed by the JACO reporting, because they dealt with certainly issues of providing safe and quality healthcare services. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator.
Mr. Chairman, I have no problem if he'd like to add that in. However, again, this was to address Section 17, in which the appropriation of $5 million was being transferred over to the GMH Stabilization Fund for the purposes of the Medicaid, Medicare Services Survey. So that's the reason why. So if he wants to add it, again, that's open.
I'm trying to limit it to CMS. We already lost JACO. We don't want to lose CMS. If we were going to give them $100 million to do what all they need, fine. But with only $5 million that we're giving them, I wanted it to be focused directly on addressing CMS in the event, so that we can, you know, prevent that October 3rd loss. So if we can just limit it, I would really appreciate that. Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to echo your sentiments. It was testified to by the Chief Financial Officer of the hospital that if they were to be given resources, she immediately exclaimed that she'd use it to pay vendors. And I think that there was a collective concern among the members present at that moment that we were wondering, why are you saying that when there's clear, when you're here testifying that your CMS priorities are the whole reason why you're present testifying at that time on behalf of a sales tax increase? And so I appreciate the amendment, focusing it on the CMS needs. I think that this is very a very smart approach to make sure that that priority is getting addressed. However, the concerns of the retiring speaker concerning the JCO accreditation issues is also also has merit. Perhaps we may want to make that be item B. If I could just put that out there as a suggestion, that the JCO issues become the subset item B, and then move everything down subsequent to that, so that everything flows from there. But I agree, Mr. Chairman, we definitely, given the statements from the CFO, and which were quite alarming, it looks like we do need to mandate that CMS is the priority, as astounding as that seems. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. What is the will of the body? Thank you, Senator. Senator Camacho Torres.
I was just going to point out too, actually you didn't see me, I guess I need to raise my hand a little higher next time. But I think that you're spot on, Mr. Speaker. We have CMS and the potential loss of that accreditation on and we shouldn't have the Joint Commission as a second priority with the CMS over supplies, materials, equipment. You know, when you're talking about blood supplies and drug supplies and oxygen supplies, that should, of course, be right up there with ensuring CMS certification. So my recommendation to the body would be to keep the amendment as is.
Thank you very much. Any other senator wish to be heard? Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I want to echo the sentiments as well of the retiring speaker. I believe we need to be focused here. We've lost the JCO accreditation, and right now the most important is the CMS. And so to add JCO to this, I think messes, it kind of messes things up. We just got to stay focused and concentrate on concentrate on addressing the deficiencies outlined by CMS.
Thank you very much. Any other senator? Is there an objection to the amendment as proffered? The amendment by Senator Espaldon, the two-page.
It's good.
As proffered. No objection. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is this going to go right here, Mr. Speaker?
Pardon?
Is this going to go in this chapter?
It's going to be the new section 18, and the current section 18 will be numbered to section 19, because I just wanted them together so that it's shown that we're dealing with the hospital and the stabilization fund, because the amended section 17 includes a reference to the stabilization fund, so I thought it'd be best if the two of them set together. Okay? Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, yesterday we passed out the amendment which uses additional tax amnesty funds for GMH. It's for GMH and for public health and for DOE. So I want to seek your guidance here, and perhaps do we deal with this one amendment, or do we amend this section of the bill?
Is this the one that has the vice speakers?
No, this is the one with myself and Senator Uggan. Yes.
Okay. It's this amendment. It's DRG FBA, General Fund Tax Amnesty Proceeds. Does everybody have a copy? The one with the sponsors, Rodriguez and Uggan. Okay, Senator, is it the short one or it's the longer one? It's the one that's almost a full page.
That's not that.
Mr. Speaker, is it the one that breaks down the 9.5? Because that's what our colleagues are saying. It
Yes.
identifies the 3 million, the 4, and then the 2.5.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
It's this longer one. I'm hoping he's passing out the right one. That looks too short. Tom, you're passing out the wrong one. Colleagues, I hope that we are all on the same one. It's nearly a full page. I know that there's a shorter version of something else, but does everybody have the amendment as proffered by Senator Rodriguez and Senator Uggan? Okay. Any senator wish to be heard on this amendment, or does Senator Rodriguez?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I bring this up now at this point of the discussions because the amendment that just passed identifying the GMHA Stabilization Fund, I think that's the appropriate fund that these revenues should go into while listing the CMS as the first priority here. For this amendment, though, Mr. Chair, is that we are proposing 3 million of the remaining 9.5 of the tax amnesty proceeds to go towards GMH, specifically for the outstanding retirement fund contributions. We understand that that amount that's due, and maybe if you or OFB could confirm that, is 2.5 that's outstanding, and that's that's an obligation that is really putting a lot of pressure on employees up there as well as the fund, for this obligation not being met. And so, I'm fine to, if it's 2.5, that it'd be 2.5 from this 3 million that is provided, unless you have another figure.
I thought the news, I haven't spoken to the retirement fund today, but I thought that the news reports was 3.5, but this will go to help to, so. All right. You may continue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So, if that's the case, this 3 million would go, a portion of that to the retirement fund obligation, and the remaining, I guess, would go into the GMHA stabilization fund. So that's my amendment. If legal counsel can assist in I guess, drafting that or including that if it passes.
So you're doing a separate amendment from what we have before us. You're taking that one by itself.
And that's what I asked, I sought your guidance on, because I felt it appropriate because of the amendment that just passed, is that it be deposited into the
Okay.
stabilization fund.
No, and I appreciate that. And that way, GMH is getting it in a row here, and leaving the others for the feeding frenzy that follows. But you have a co-sponsor in this amendment. Do you? Oh, you. Okay, so the only thing that Senator Rodriguez is moving at this point is just the first 6 lines of his amendment as it relates to GMH for 3 million. Okay, and Senator Uggan, who was the co-sponsor, has no problem with this. And then you can make your motion to deal with education, but at least legal knows what language we're talking about, okay? So this amendment is just the first 6 lines of what we have before us.
So just to clarify, Mr. Chair, that all the lines after the word act will be deleted? Then perhaps we should take that in motion form, that amendment to the amendment would be to delete all words on line 6 after the word act be deleted.
Correct. We'll put a period after ACT.
Okay.
Okay?
And everything's deleted. Thank you.
All right. Senator Rodriguez is withdrawing the complete amendment and instead is making an amendment. If everybody can just help me follow. There's a full page with 3 different amendments on it, okay? Senator Rodriguez has graciously agreed, and so has his co-sponsor agreed, to divide this in 3. So they're withdrawing this amendment. Is there any objection? He is now making the amendment on just the first 6 lines as it relates to GMH, ending at ACT, A-C-T. Period there. Just giving $3 million to GMH to take care of its retirement fund delinquency. Any wish to be heard, Senator Uggan?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So you just made a statement, Mr. Speaker, that the chairman of health would like to give the $3 million to address the retirement fund obligation. So, and the language reads, and to correct the deficiencies as identified. So, do you need any additional deletions here?
I'm not the mover of the amendment. I'm just saying, he thought that the amount that's owed to retirement fund is only 2.5. My recollection is actually it's 3.5, and it's close. By now, it's probably close. Well, it was 3.2.
Okay.
So there won't be any left over to correct any further deficiencies on top of the one that we gave in the previous section.
But, Mr. Speaker, the only reason why I bring that up is because the previous amendment that was adopted and the previous section already alluded to addressing the CMS concerns immediately. So,
if one of you wants to strike that, I would have no problem.
No, yes. And so that's why earlier I asked that legal counsel can guide us here. So the 3 million now would go to GMH for the retirement, the outstanding retirement obligations. And if there's any left
No.
over, then it goes to the stabilization fund, if there is.
Okay.
But if not, then it's all for the retirement obligation.
Mr. Speaker, if
Yes.
the mover of the amendment, I understand you want to direct it to GMH, but perhaps the appropriation should go directly to the retirement fund to address the GMH outstanding obligations, rather than going through a middle person. It's up to the mover of the amendment. I understand his intent, and I think he's absolutely right on point in terms of trying to address that obligation.
A good point. Rather than sending it into that, I won't say it publicly, just pay off directly. I'll take a short recess and you guys can figure out with legal. Committee's back in order. Senator Rodriguez, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, my first amendment is to a motion to withdraw my previous amendment.
On the motion to withdraw the previous amendment, any objection? Senator Rodriguez, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The amendment now, which has been circulated, is to amend, is to add this amendment that's before us as General Fund Tax Amnesty Program proceeds. And if I can read it, because there's additional things here that shouldn't be here. So the amendment should read, notwithstanding any other provision of law, rule, or regulation, the sum of $3 million of the General Fund Tax Amnesty Program proceeds received in fiscal year 2018 shall be appropriated to the Guam Retirement Fund for Guam Memorial Hospital Authority's outstanding retirement fund contributions, period. Everything else should not be there.
Thank you very much. Is everybody clear on the amendment being proffered by Senator Rodriguez? That there is a period after contributions and the rest of the last two lines are struck. Okay? Is everybody clear on the Rodriguez amendment? Anyone wish to be heard on the Rodriguez amendment? Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just very quickly, because obviously in this particular case, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So we're looking now at the appropriation of $5 million to address CMS, plus the $3 million for the balance of this fiscal year to address the retirement fund contribution for GMH.
Correct.
Okay. Just wanted to reiterate that, in fact, in this case, GMH is getting additional resources so I certainly hope that they don't scream and holler for the balance of this fiscal year.
On top of the 30 that we gave them and the $9 million for the L&D. It's huge. Okay, so the Rodriguez amendment, anybody else wish to be heard on the Rodriguez amendment? Senator Vice Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, this is the amendment for the retirement fund contributions? Is that
For the retirement fund contributions.
All right. I have no objection to it going to the retirement fund, but, you know, I feel like making this appropriation right now without any kind of accountability from GMH. I know that they were sued by the retirement fund, so this has been an issue outstanding for quite a while if it got to that point already, and I'd like to know the status of the lawsuit, and I want to know if there's any personal liability, because I thought that was also one of the laws passed. I'm not sure, but I wanted, if there's going to be any kind of personal liability for people who make decisions not to fund retirement fund contributions or not to pay them. I mean, I thought that prior legislation had seen this problem over and over. So that's my concern, is that this does not solve that problem, not alone. It doesn't stop them from doing that tomorrow, from withholding retirement contributions again tomorrow. And I think we really, if we're going to do this, we need to take care of that. That's solved once and for all. That there's some kind of criminal liability, and I thought that there was under the Department of Labor statutes. I don't know, but that's why I'd like to see or hear from the retirement fund as to what they see as permanent remedy to this, or what they put into their complaint.
Yes, that has to be addressed, and it has to be tighter and more strict for GMH, especially since, like, unfortunately, an addict, it keeps falling off the wagon. And so I don't know how to be able to address that. The retirement board has they're liable. They have to be sued, and it has to stick. There was a time when the CFO and a number of GMH employees were sued, and we're going to have to go back and look at those suits. But right now, it's just this amendment. And if you have if you want to do a separate statute amendment, please do that. But right now, we're just dealing with
Yes, I
paying
understand. Well,
this
that's
off.
why I'm asking you. I was asking if you had the documents from the court. I haven't seen the complaint that was filed against the Guam Memorial Hospital for these amounts, and I had assumed that since that complaint was filed, that they had at least made some kind of progress towards paying it off. And you're saying they haven't made a single dime of what was, or have they, or are they making efforts to pay this off or not?
I am not, I have no idea. I did not receive anything from GMH. It's not been, I haven't seen it in the inbox, either directly emailed to me a copy of the lawsuit or in the communications and messages. We can deal with that separately, please, if possible.
Are you aware of how long of a period the $3 million accumulated over?
I have no personal knowledge, but I can, from my recollection of news stories, state that it's as far back as March. My recollection was this, I'm trying to find, I have nothing directly from them, but my recollection from the news stories was that it was as far back as March. And there was a lawsuit against a couple of I remember it was the CFO personally, because I know he suffered quite a bit for the lawsuit because we pressed it. I mean, I pushed it. And then the AG never followed through, didn't follow through, and they never finished that suit.
You're talking about prior years?
Yes.
All right, but this $3 million from March of 2018?
Correct.
I'm just concerned, Mr. Speaker, and I know we're gonna send this money to the retirement fund, but we continue to set a precedent that if agency directors frankly mess up in this way, and really this should be criminal in my book, but when they mess up like this and they see the legislature just run in and save them by funding it, you know, without any accountability, there's not even been an oversight hearing as to why they haven't paid their retirement contributions, or whose decision was that to pass the retirement contributions. I mean, we haven't even seen one dime being taken away from salaries of the directors who are making over $200,000. That doesn't make any sense to me, Mr. Speaker. So I want the money to go to the retirees. Of course, they should have had it a long time ago, and I think but I just don't want to add to their negligence by continuing to allow them to do this repeatedly.
Thank you. And as soon as we break, I will try to get you a copy of the lawsuit. We have an amendment on the floor. Senator Munya.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also share the same concerns as the previous speaker, and I just wanted to find out, or maybe even clarify, if it had already been answered. The $3 million that we're hoping to take from the tax amnesty program, is that just to cover the March 2018 debt to the retirement fund?
It has been accumulating since the pay period March 31st of 18. And every pay period since then, they've not made their contribution to the retirement fund. And as of today, I'm not saying whether or not what it's going to be tomorrow with payday, but the last word that I got from the retirement fund is that their outstanding obligation is 3.2.
So with this $3 million, if it's passed, would it cover that?
It will go to it'll cover 3 of the 3.2, and hopefully the hospital, with all the other appropriations that we're providing them, will make good on on its payments.
Okay. I was just wondering where that 3 million came from, but you answered the question.
Yeah,
Thank
it
you.
was from the retirement fund. We got word from the administrator that it's 3.2 as of today,
Okay.
and it has been accumulating since pay period March 31st of this year.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, but if it's been accumulating since, so what in your mind is going to stop them from doing this again tomorrow? Is it they're going to wait until 2019 appropriations to pay the next retirement? Or?
Hopefully, I have no idea. I am not, nor do I know anybody who's on the board of GMH. Ms. Nicholas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too share the sentiments of the retiring speakers in that, you know, this is a classic tactic that's been employed by this chief financial officer in her various capacities in this government, where she will purposely not fund things that become either crises or lawsuits and divert funding into other areas. And then we get presented with a crisis or a lawsuit that we need to all of a sudden scramble to fund. But I agree with you also too, Mr. Speaker, it's a management issue. There's almost nothing we can do legislatively to stop that kind of horrible financial practice. It's a gross disservice. You're holding hostage people's retirement so you can play the money shell game. And the CFO has been doing it for years. I've observed it throughout my entire career here in the Legislatura. And I've also observed this body do its duty for those whom she is injuring and come riding into the rescue, as this amendment would do as well. Unfortunately, we don't hire and fire. But I am making some very strong statements at this time, Mr. Chairman, because we are potentially going to have a new administration that can make sure we never have this kind of management again. And that needs to be a very clear statement, not just in this particular case, but in any other case where any other manager is going to be purposely maneuvering these kind of financial practices in order to cause the most harm so they can get what they want. I cannot for the life of me understand why anybody of a conscience would do these things. And you would think that at the very least your conscience would compel you not to. Unfortunately, that's just not what we're dealing with here, Mr. Chairman, and unfortunately that is now the type of financial management that we're being faced with at the Guam Memorial Hospital. So I share the sentiments of the retiring speaker, but I can speak from experience and say that this is, with this particular financial manager, nothing new. But we still have this obligation, and these people looking to retire still need to get paid. And while we didn't create the problem, we do have a potential solution, and it's something that we need to, in our good conscience, do. But I'm going to be the one to very plainly state that these kind of managers have no place in public service, and I'm hoping that in a short amount of time, we'll be able to remedy that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Torres.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to point out that I think that the way that the amendment is proffered perhaps is not a prudent and appropriate way to do it, because when you consider how the body included an appropriation to GMH from the tax amnesty program, it was done in a way to amend essentially amend the Budget Act of 2018, Fiscal Year Budget Act, which is Public Law 3442. And that was how they were, the mechanism was in play to appropriate money from fiscal year 18 collections to the GMH by directly amending that section in the Budget Act that relates to GMH, which is Chapter 3. In this instance, it's a direct appropriation from the tax amnesty proceeds into fiscal year 2019. So I think that it's a bit, because this amendment as it is just says notwithstanding you're appropriating funds received in 2018 to the specific fund. It doesn't go back and amend something specifically. It's just the application of owed money to owed debt in an upcoming fiscal year budget. My point, I guess, what I'm trying to say is that the government has the ability right now to use any monies that it collects in the tax amnesty program to retire, for the retirement fund contribution. Right now, it doesn't require us to designate in an upcoming fiscal year budget. And so I just think that if, in support of everything that has been said before, the governor has the ability to do that right now with these monies. It doesn't require us to mandate it. And if there's some concern about good faith effort and meeting obligations, that's well within their authority right now and ability to do. So I just have some concern about mandating that money go into the retirement fund this way. I just don't think there is a need for this type of an amendment into the budget bill for fiscal year 2019. It just seems a little misplaced.
Thank you. These set of amendments will have, there's an effective date provision. I thought we had a provision that was going to say that the effective date of these sections in this Budget Act would be immediate. And we can correct that. The previous $5 million that was going to the hospital was going to a specific fund within the hospital. This amendment is bypassing the hospital and going directly to pay for the bank, as it were, rather than give the child that has a problem with money, you pay the debt directly rather than give it to them, because you never know whether or not it's going to make it there.
Yes, I see that distinction, yes. Thank you. And perhaps that is the distinction that needed to be made.
Okay. Any other senator wish to be heard on this Rodriguez amendment? Senator Espaldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, just to clarify upon what you alluded to, in essence, that this appropriation will become effective immediately upon enactment. And then the language will be added to...
Yes, we will make sure that with legal that all these provisions with the tax amnesty use will be effective immediately upon enactment.
Okay, thank you. Because I have seen that in other sections, and so that's what's missing in this amendment.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Eda.
I guess my concern is that we have seen some in the past here with GMH, some really slick cash management movements, and since the outstanding retirement contribution of about $2.5 million is in court now. There's nothing that says that, well, we'll let that ride because it may take a while for the court to get to this. And then when the new fiscal year, the, continue to defer payment of the retirement fund contributions, because the way this language reads is that this $3 million could pay for outstanding retirement contributions that's due in fiscal year 2018, or that could become due in 2019. So maybe we need specific language here that shall be appropriated for the retirement fund for outstanding retirement fund contribution for fiscal year 2018, so that it's clear that this $3 million is for what is due now in FY 2018 and not for any further accumulation in the following year. So,
yes, go ahead.
So then I would just make the amendment, I would propose to make the amendment, appropriate it to the government retirement fund, or shall be appropriated retirement for Guam Memorial Hospital Authority's outstanding FY 2018 retirement fund contributions.
Senator Atta is proposing that between outstanding and retirement fund, you put in FY 18 Does everybody understand that? That it should read for Guam Memorial Hospital Authority's outstanding FY 18 retirement fund contributions. Okay?
Mr. Speaker, can you just read that across one more time?
It'll read on that fifth line, outstanding, and insert FY 18, and then continue retirement fund contributions, period. Okay? On that amendment, is there any objection to Senator Addison?
We don't have any of these documents. I just want to make sure that's accurate, Mr. Speaker, that it's only the FY 18.
It's running from pay period March 31st, 18 to today. Okay? And you will be provided a copy of the filing as soon as we print it. It has been sent to us. Okay? On Senator Espaldon.
Thank you. That was a good catch by the mover of the amendment to the amendment. However, again, that just a point of information that doesn't preclude the management at GMH to withhold further contribution to retirement fund for the rest of fiscal year 2018. And so, again, it's just a point that I'd like to make. But there it is. We are at least giving them something to make up for the retirement fund non-contribution that they've done.
Yes, and this
you.
just covers 3 of the 3.2 that's currently outstanding.
Right.
And I have no idea how to be able to control unless, of course, it's going to have to be, those of you that are remaining, the power of confirmation, you need to make sure that the people that you're naming to governance are going to enforce. Okay, on the amendment as amended, anybody else? Any objection? Thank you. Senator Rodriguez, you have a series of amendments. Do you wish to yield to one of your colleagues to get one slide in so that...
Okay. Oh, you want me to do this first? So I'm going to reduce this. Okay. I'll do this first.
Okay.
She trusts me.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the second amendment is on Section 20. And this is in coordination with Senator Uggan. We are increasing the amount on the proceeds of tax amnesty for Department of Education to $3 million. So this amendment here before us says, and I'll read it, the sum of $3 million, we're striking out the $500,000, so it's just going to be $3 million, is appropriated from the General Fund Tax Amnesty Program proceeds received in fiscal year 2018 to the Guam Department of Education for the sole purpose of the procurement of an owner's agent engineer, architectural and engineering services, and other related services pursuant to sections 52, 101, and so forth. And so what this does, Mr. Chair, is that it adds an additional 1.5 to DOE, specifically to fund the OAE and A&E services for the Simon Sanchez High School renovation.
Everybody understand the amendment that's being proffered by Senator Rodriguez and Senator Uggan? Anyone, Mr. Chairman, you wish to?
I'd like to speak in favor of the amendment, but I'm just concerned is that, does that total the $5 million that they need to be able to fund? What's the total amount as we look at the other parts of the bill? We added some funds for Simon Sanchez for the O&E, and this is to add 3.5 more, right?
3.
No? Just 3. 3 to what?
To
Nothing
the
else?
one that's already been passed.
Okay, because my understanding that it was supposed to cost about $5 million total to hire. I mean, I just want to make sure that
The superintendent said between 4 and 5, and because of other things, we are trying to give them.
at least 4.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Uggan and then Senator Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for clarifying that. Yes, in this particular case, it's an original appropriation in the Guam Department of Education section that would allocate $1 million. Here, the section as exists would allocate 1.5, but you know, the superintendent said he'll take anything and he'll begin the process, but the reality is he also alluded in his communication during the public hearing that it would cost anywhere from $45 million. So the cumulative amount here with this amendment, Senator Rodriguez and myself, is to ensure that that seed financing requirement is in place. And the biggest question has always been, how much is this brand new school facility going to cost the people of Guam? Well, these are the preliminary services that are necessary to ensure that we get that final figure. Because I know that there were concerns previously, Mr. Speaker, about providing a financing mechanism in law and not knowing exactly how much the school is going to cost. So this would provide that information to the future legislatures in terms of what the cost of the new Simon Sanchez High School is going to be, so that in fact there's appropriate financing available in the future. So, Mr. Speaker, I thank the good senator for moving this and also being co-sponsor, and I ask our colleagues to please endorse it so that we can get this project proceeding forward ASAP. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Lee, you're recognized.
Sitos Masi, Mr. Speaker. I certainly rise in support of fully funding the owner's agent engineer and supporting Simon Sanchez and the rebuilding of a new Simon Sanchez, but I just have a few questions with regard to this amendment. Does OFB or the previous speaker or the education chair have the information regarding the last A&E that we had procured for prior school renovation or rebuild?
If point of information, anybody can respond. I see the hand of Senator Addick getting up. Okay. He might. So, it's.
No,
if anybody has any information, we don't have it from here.
I don't have any information about previous A&E services that were provided, but I do have an amendment for that particular section, which I have passed out just to further clarify really what it is that we are wanting to procure with this now $3.5 million. And as a minimum, you know, what kind of deliverable can we expect? Because we know that $3.5 million, you know, is just a small fraction of what is needed to finally get this school constructed. But I think it's important that that we articulate, you know, what as a minimum is the expectation from this money that's being made available.
Okay, if I can just finish with Senator Lee first. She has a series of questions.
Yeah, so I don't know anything about previous A&E services.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Do you have
Speaker.
the
Just a point of information. That was one of the inquiries that was made during the course of either an oversight hearing or a public hearing on legislation. And as a matter of fact, the superintendent was going to get back to, I believe it may have been the chair of education, and I don't know if he has, but he was supposed to do some necessary research and see if in fact that particular A&E design is owned by the previous contractor that constructed either JFK or Okudu High School. Because if it belongs to the specific contractor, then obviously certain arrangement has to be set up between the government of Guam to be able to acquire that. So that was a consideration, and I know the superintendent has mentioned that he will entertain that as a possibility if it's going to result in reducing the cost, but also ensuring that the community at Simon Sanchez High School, the teachers, the faculty, the administrators, and most especially the students have direct input in terms of the kind of facilities that will be constructed. So I have not received a response from the superintendent, but he did say and allude to whether in fact that particular design belonged to the contractor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I absolutely very much appreciate the information from the retiring speaker. I also, just as a point of information for the body, wanted to add that the Guam Power Authority spent less than $2 million on their $400 million power plant. And so I kind of just wanted to put those kinds of things into perspective, and I'm certainly looking forward to hearing more from Senator Ada on his detailed amendment. Sizos Masi.
Thank you. Any other senator on the Rodriguez amendment? And it's on the amount is $3 million, not 3.5. Okay.
But Mr. Speaker, that we've already passed.
Correct. In the previous section, we gave them $1 million from 19. But I'm just saying for this amendment, it's 3, not 3.5. Any senator wish to be heard? Senator Ada, you're recognized. You have an amendment on this section?
Well, I do have an amendment on this subparagraph A of section 20, but I also have, actually the amendment that I have is for the existing section 20 on page 129. So the only difference between the existing section is that it's instead of 1.5, it is now 3 million. But I have other language that I would like to offer an amendment to.
I'll allow you to make that now.
Huh? You want me to make it now?
Well, yeah, because otherwise,
All right.
let's take this amendment.
So I would like to make clear on paragraph 20A. I want to make clear that what we want to procure is to contract the services of an owner's agent engineer. We are not procuring an owner's agent engineer. So then on line 10 on page 129, we really wanted to read Department of Education, where we're appropriating this sum of money to the Department of Education to contract the services of an owner's agent engineer. And when we contract those services, the services is for the purpose of developing and managing the solicitation for procurement of A&E services and other related services that will serve as the basis for subsequent design and construction phases. Now, the rest of the language there on paragraph 20A, starting there at line 12, it says, pursuant to subsections 52.101 and 52.102, I don't understand how that ties in with the procurement of the A&E services and all that, because when you go to, and again, this is where legal counsel needs to advise, but when you take a look at those sections, it really talks more about when monies get appropriated, it goes here, it goes there, but it has nothing to do with procurement. So I don't know if that's relevant in there. So if you just take a look then at really the amendment that I had put out, it shows where I would like to amend on the existing section 20, paragraph A. So to be clear, we are to contract the services of an OAE. We're not procuring an OAE. And when the services that we are contracting for is for the development and management of the solicitation for procurement of A&E services and related services that will serve as the basis for subsequent design and construction phases.
Senator Uggan, as the original.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, just a couple of comments. With regards to the use of the term sole purpose of the procurement, that was from a prior enabling legislation prior to Public Law 34, that's 101. So that's the same verbiage that was carried into this provision. Also, the line that says pursuant to subsection 52.101 and 52.102 of Chapter 52, Division 2, Title 11, Guam Code annotated, is the enabling legislation that allows for the Guam Department of Education to be able to proceed with the construction process of a new Simon Sanchez High School. So that's why it had that specific language. So rather than being a standalone provision, it makes direct reference to the enabling legislation that would authorize the Guam Department of Education to be able to proceed with the A&E and the OAE, Owner's Agent Engineer, services, whether it's procurement or contracting of services. To me, you still have to procure the contract. So in this case, I have no issues with the amendment, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to ensure that everyone understood why that particular language was inserted in there in terms of ensuring that the enabling legislation is referenced in the allocation of the proceeds. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Uggan. Senator Torres.
Just a technical mention, Mr. Speaker. On line 4, it's referencing, there was a typo, it's referencing the wrong public law. It should read 34-42. It reads 32-42 now on line 4. So I just wanted to point that out while we're on that section. 3242 has to do with the Port Authority and borrowing. So
All right,
just
thank
know
you.
that.
Any other senator wish to be heard? Any other senator wish to be heard on the ADA amendment? To the appropriation for the Guam Department of Education for Simon Sanchez procurement?
That's just for paragraph A.
Okay. It's his amendment to Dennis's amendment for the same paragraph.
Just to clarify, Mr. Chair, I believe, Mr. Chair, just to clarify, I believe that Senator Ada's amendment is an amendment to the amendment of Senator Rodriguez.
Correct.
Thank you.
Just as it relates to paragraph A. Vice Speaker.
So are there any amendments to this A? What we
The
have in
amendment to
front
A, just fold it.
No, I see
and
Senator
stop
Addis,
and-
but was there any amendment made to Senator Addis? No, right?
These are his amendments
I know.
to Senator Rodriguez's amendment for $3 million.
I know, I'm just trying to follow that last discussion about code sections, but, okay, so, I like this amendment, I commend the author, I think it makes it more exact how the money is going to be spent, and that we are trying to stretch this money for all these purposes, but I wanted to know if anyone could clarify, and this is the same thing that I brought up on the earlier bill regarding Simon Sanchez, this related services, can anybody clarify or be more specific as to what type of services we want to include here?
Senator Ada?
Sure. So the other related services is that with the deliverable that we're expecting, the owner's agent engineer is going to have to conduct a lot of stakeholder meetings, planning for that and conducting it as to really what does the school want as for the new Simon Sanchez. So there's those kind of services, coordination services that need to be done. He may also, in that, may be required to make some research with Department of Land Management about, basically the boundaries of where the grounds are. He may have to take out, if there's enough funds, contract for the services of some geotechnical engineering services to start doing some borings on where the school is going to be built. So all these are those preliminaries that really just, are the data and information that subsequently will be needed for the construction phase.
Anything further, Vice Speaker?
Yeah, I guess I'm just going to state my concern, Mr. Speaker, with the whole amendment to kind of throw this money there without knowing in more detail what it's going to be used for. It really highlights that, wow, did we just totally waste all the time and money spent by the Department of Public Works and DOE and GITA, the members of that prior procurement team, that they had nothing to go by when they created their specs?
Just as a point of information, Mr. Chairman, in the previous rounds of procurement that was undertaken, DPW really did not, you know, develop any spec. Well, they developed some specs, but it's just really not clear what it is that the school wants. At least with the amendment, and at least with the amendment that I'm proffering in the next new paragraph B, it articulates at a minimum what kind of deliverable is being expected for this amount of money.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I very much appreciate the detail that's being added by this amendment. I guess I'm just concerned about all the money. When Simon Sanchez was originally, when the original law to build Simon Sanchez was passed, it was very clear the funding was going to come from the Territorial Education Fund. It was going to come from increase in taxes based on a new revaluation that was occurring. And so that was a dedicated funding source. And then I think it's good that you included an appropriation for FY19 for A&E. That's consistent with the original law. It put aside 1.7 million or something like that for Simon Sanchez, just to be appropriated straight for the the building of Simon Sanchez. And then it put aside the rest of the money to be used in that leaseback or other financing that GITA could have came up with, but for the leaseback. But the only thing about the prior system was that it gave some incentive to save on, and I would just like to have some kind of incentive for DOE to save money as much as it can on A&E and get into the construction, because every dime that you can save in A&E, you know this from building your own house, is going to be able to be put into construction or be able to be put into furnishings. And I just don't want them, now we're taking this from a separate source than the original sources that were dedicated to paying off this entire Simon Sanchez. And if that's going to expedite it, that's good. But I think we should come up with some kind of mechanism that the amount that they use for this is deducted from the amount that then they can use for construction, just so that it stays within that original intent of the law that they were going to come up with and negotiate savings that would benefit the student. And I'm very concerned about the what a previous speaker talked about, when if we have nothing in front of us to show why it's going to cost $5 million, and we've seen other buildings in the government of Guam being built very beautifully, I may add, for less, then I'm concerned about that, Mr. Speaker. But I support the amendments in subsection 8 made by Senator Ada. Those would tighten it up. Thank you.
Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support the amendments as well. I'd like to kind of provide or at least
We're only on A, just
yes,
the amendment in A.
Yes, and this is for the procurement of the owner's agent engineer, the clarification language. And I just wanted to provide some context. In the not too distant past, we actually never did A&E separately. We approved borrowing parameters, and then they went out and borrowed, and then they funded the A&E as a part of the overall borrowing. This practice that we've recently adopted in this body, that goes back a couple legislatures, to actually try and fund the A&E first, is a very healthy practice for a variety of reasons. The first is that by not lumping it into a bond, we're not paying interest on top of the cost for the A&E. Basically, with a bond, a 30-year bond, you're going to triple the cost of the service. And so by cashing the A&E first, we're not incurring the interest expenses. So this is a practice now in this body is something that's fairly recent and very, very healthy and very good for the people of Guam. I wanted to remind the body that this language speaks to the solicitation and procurement of A&D services. So the entire amount is not going to be committed if the solicitation and procurement results in competitive bids that are at a price point lower than the amounts being authorized. And to my knowledge, the amendment that this is amending allows for the funds to be used for purposes other than the A&D after the A&D has already been funded. So because it goes through a solicitation and because it goes through a procurement process, we're going to be paying in cash for an A&D that would be competitively solicited. And so it's very difficult for us to craft a mechanism beyond that would try and contain the A&D costs without knowing what those costs were. But we wouldn't know what those costs were if we never solicited and procured for them. And the reality is that every single project is different, so the solicitations and procurements for one project may be different from another. I'm not quite sure how the power plant procurement compares in terms of this type of activity. Did they pay for their A&D in cash first, or was it part of an overall financing scheme? I don't know. But I do know that by doing it this way, using cash to pay for our A&D for Simon Sanchez, we're not going to be incurring the interest expense, and we're still going to be going through a solicitation and procurement. So at the end of the transaction, when it's closed, it may very well result in a cost point that is lower than the amounts that we're providing, and that's when the other components of the amendment kick in, where the money can go to other areas within the Department of Education. So I just want to put that on the record that I think that this amendment further strengthens the intent of the original amendment by very specifically saying what the funds are going to be used for, and also clarifying that we're not going to be authorizing the hiring of an OAE. We're going to be contracting one out, and that this OAE is going to be facilitating a solicitation and a procurement process, of which in the bill that we recently passed specific to Simon Sanchez also involves a different set of players with respect to procurements. So there's multiple layers here, and in lieu of the alternative, which is to borrow for an A&D and lump it all into one big project and not have these kind of questions being asked, I actually would prefer that we go about this way. It's a little bit more transparent and definitely is a lot less expensive. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Senator Espaldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I appreciate the amendment to the amendment that's before us and all the comments that were made. However, as I keep reading through it, I think this falls a little bit short, and so I need to ask the question, does the $3 million that's being appropriated here, is that intended to be used for the procurement of A&E services as well?
Yes.
And if the answer is yes, which it is, then there's a problem with just the way the syntax is, the way this is worded. Because the way this is worded now is that DOE is to contract services of an owner's agent engineer to develop and manage the solicitation for procurement of A&E services. So basically, the way I understand it to read, or could be interpreted to read, is that this money will be for the contracting of services for somebody who's going to manage and develop the solicitation for the procurement of A&E. So it doesn't have any language here that specifically says that the money is going to be going towards A&E. This money is designated towards the owner's agent engineer to manage and to develop and manage the solicitation for the architect and engineering services. And so it does not speak to this money going towards the procurement of architectural and engineering services. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask for a recess that we might be able to take a look at that a little closer, because it could be interpreted to say that this full amount will just be going towards the owner, agent, engineer, and not for architect and engineering services.
We'll take a very short recess so that the three of you can discuss. We're back in the committee of the whole. I want to thank the senators for getting together, and we now have an amendment. Senator Rodriguez, Senator Uggan, Senator Atta, and Senator Espaldon. Does everybody have a copy of the amendment for A? Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my first motion is to withdraw the amendment that we had before us.
The amendment has been withdrawn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, now I move this amendment that is co-sponsored by Senator Uggan, Senator Atta, and Senator Espaldon. And what it really does is that it consolidates the three amendments. The first one that we put forward, which increased the amount that is appropriated to DOE for the Simon Sanchez rebuild project. And then the other two amendments that Senator Atta and Senator Espaldon had worked and spoke on the floor is now all part of this one amendment.
Thank you. Does any other senator wish to be heard on this amendment? Any senator wish to be heard on this amendment? Any objection to this amendment? Colleagues, can we please get back at 2 o'clock so that we can start up and get all of the amendments that you're going to proffer copied so that we can move quickly through the remaining pages of, all right? Thank you. We are recessed for lunch until 2 o'clock.